It is about time for us to kick off our program today. Y'all can certainly continue to eat your delicious burritos that we have this morning. But we're going to go ahead and kick off the program. Hope that you all had a great night last night, had a chance to step out into the invigorating mountain air today. I don't know where y'all are from. I'm from Tennessee, and it's going to be hard to go back after going outside to 55-degree temperatures in the morning instead of 90-degree temperatures in the morning. It is nice out here. But we are going to first have a panel about government spending and Millennials' future. And to introduce the panel, I'm going to ask one of our sponsors to come out and introduce the panel for them. Thank
you. Morning. My name is David Barnes. I'm the Policy Director of Generation Opportunity. Generation Opportunity is a national advocacy organization building a grassroots movement of young people in order to advance a free society. And we're here today to talk about the largest challenge facing young people, and that's government spending and debt. We brought together three panelists to discuss. You can come on the stage right now. First is Al Downs. He's an economic policy analyst at Generation Opportunity. He focuses on issues ranging from occupational licensing to crowdfunding policy to the sharing economy to Social Security. And then we have Dr. Barry Poulson. He's an emeritus professor of economics at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's published widely on economic history and development economics. Dr. Poulson's a past president of the North American Economics and Finance Association. And thirdly, we have Kelly Maher. She's a nationally recognized Republican commentator and executive director for Compass Colorado, a center-right free market advocacy organization. Kelly has worked over 15 years in politics with roles at every level of various state and federal candidate and issue campaigns. Take it away.
All right, thanks a lot, David. So as David said, my name is Al Downs. I'm the economic policy analyst for Generation Opportunity. We have great panelists here today. And just to dig right into it, Dr. Poulson, could you give us kind of a 30,000-foot explanation of the scope of the federal debt today?
Well, our fundamental problem at the federal level is that for the last half century, federal spending has been growing much more rapidly than the growth of our national income. And the major driver of this rapid growth of federal spending are entitlements programs, which we'll be talking about today. And unfortunately, our federal government has chosen to finance a larger share of this spending with deficits and debt. And over the last decade, the magnitude of debt has increased to more than $20 trillion. Now, the real problem is that this is projected to continue. The Congressional Budget Office basically projects that this increased debt, the growth of debt, will continue in coming decades. Our total debt now is over 100% of GDP. And the CBO projects that this ratio will increase to even higher levels. Now, the problem is that at some point here, in fact, we're already seeing the evidence of this, this growth of debt will be accompanied by slower economic growth. We're already seeing that now. Currently, in recent years, our growth has been less than 2% compared to an historical average of 3% or more. The problem is then, as this debt grows, our economy experiences retardation and stagnation. But long before we stagnate, what's going to happen is that the increased interest on that debt will reflect the higher probability of default. And at that point, our economy is basically dead in the water. And we're not talking about 50, 75 years from now. We're talking about what's going to happen over the next couple of decades, which is what the CBO forecasts.
So that's some pretty scary stuff, and I imagine everybody here in this room, and certainly all three of us on the panel, that resonates a lot with us. But Generation Opportunity works obviously a lot with young Americans, and one trouble that we face is when we say a lot of these numbers to folks in the millennial generation, their response is, well, that's the government's problem. That doesn't really affect me. I can't internalize the immediate impacts. Kelly, can you talk a little bit about what you think resonates most with millennials to make this issue important to them?
Yeah, I mean, look, at first this morning I thought it was kind of ironic that we were having a panel about millennials at 8 a.m. Then I realized, this is the one time that we can talk about these issues that it's almost guaranteed that, we're going to be the two millennials in the room. So we can talk about them while they're not here. No, but here's the thing, is that, I mean, ouch, but it is 8 a.m. No, here's the thing, is that like, I'm actually, a little bit unique in that I studied economics and I always thought I was going to be an economist. And actually one of my mentors, a friend of Dr. Poulson's, a guy named Professor Ballantyne, told me, we were in this conversation about economics and we were talking about economic theory and why it was such a big deal. We were actually in a class called New Ideas from Dead Economists, which was a fascinating class at the time. And we were having this debate about the role of firms and the role of government. And Professor Ballantyne looked at me and he said, Kelly, what you don't understand is that economics is always right, but politics always wins. And it struck me. Because at that point, I thought, I'll just go be an economist at some firm. And I was like, I don't want to just sit around being theoretical and right. I want to win. And that was the thing that actually moved me from the economic sphere into the political sphere. And it is why I am today a political consultant. And so the question is, how do we take these large things and actually convert them into something that can be understood by people who, like me, grew up on Sesame Street, who are used to processing things by video in less than a minute or two, who, like me, live on Twitter in 140 characters. I mean, the gravity of what our economy is facing is huge, and yet trying to distill that down into something that is that makes people feel like it is as critical as it is, that is also something that makes millennials like us feel like we have skin in the game, is so important. And I think we're all struggling with the idea of how to sell freedom over free stuff, i.e. every Bernie Sanders supporter that is out there in the millennial generation. And it's really, really hard. And I applaud Gen Op for a lot of the things that they are doing in terms of being able to kind of distill those ideas. But I think we have yet to find kind of that, that silver bullet necessarily. But I think that continuing the conversation is the most critical thing. So if you're not on Twitter, get on Twitter. And if you are not on Snapchat, get on Snapchat. I mean, it doesn't really make sense to me yet, but it will someday. And at least start having those conversations with young people. And I think that that's one thing that we're certainly lacking.
And I think you're absolutely right that maybe the medium of the discussion that folks have been having from the conservative folks try to have with millennials may be the wrong place to do it. And Twitter and Snapchat could be a more effective means to have that communication. Yeah. But it also may be the case that kind of the points of discussion are wrong. Mm-hmm. When we talk about high interest rates and high deficits growing, the focus maybe should be more on what does this mean for contract workers? The kind of jobs that folks in our generation get are very different than past generations. And what does that mean for their relationship to the federal government, to the debt and deficit, and how is that going to have an immediate impact on their life? You mentioned that the growing interest payments on the federal debt is going to be a huge driver in the future. But this year alone, the CBO projects that $106 billion of Social Security will be deficit financed because it's interest payments. So I think that shifting the conversation and using those big numbers where they're appropriate, but thinking about kind of the relationship and the changing economy is an important way to do that.
I think you're absolutely right, and I agree with you. I think that this rapid growth of spending, especially entitlement spending, really involves a massive redistribution of wealth from all of us, our generation, to your generation. And thank you very much for that. We really appreciate that. But
you're welcome for your health care.
Unfortunately, for millennials, for young people, they will bear the brunt of the cost of these programs in several ways. One is the projections of unfunded liabilities in these entitlements programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, are unsustainable. And the kinds of benefits you and I all benefit from, Social Security and so forth, simply will not be there for your generation. So the other cost, which is sort of a hidden cost, is that this rapid growth of government spending is causing retardation of economic growth. So and this is projected to continue over the next decade. So the economic opportunities that you and I have enjoyed for several generations will not be there for your generation under current law. So obviously, what this tells me is we need to do several things. One is we need to get total spending under control, and we need to begin to introduce some fiscal rules that will accomplish that. Current fiscal rules at the federal level fail. We do have a statutory rule, by the way, which says that the federal government is supposed to balance the budget, but Congress routinely ignores it or circumvents it, and so we need to get a control on total spending, and an important part of that will be controlling entitlement spending. And as I was talking with you earlier, there are precedents out there in other countries and including our own country for, one, controlling spending, both at the federal level and the state level, and reforming these entitlements programs.
Absolutely, and of course you're referring to the Reagan administration's effort to reform Social Security. And at GenOp, when we go out and talk to young people about those reforms, and this is kind of fits into the larger millennial view about Social Security, Kelly, I'm sure you have some great points on this too, is that people in our generation, over 2/3 of us, don't expect to get anything from Social Security, which leads us to have different savings patterns than other generations. But with the understanding, or at least the expectation that there will be nothing coming from Social Security, when people hear that there were 1983, 84 reforms, the first reaction we usually get is, well, that clearly didn't work. You know, we're here now, and most millennials weren't even born when Reagan was in office. So there's kind of maybe a disconnect within the millennial generation about the success of those reforms. But I think your point is well taken.
I disagree with you. I think that the Reagan reforms were successful, and the reforms involved beginning to limit benefits, increasing the age of retirement, and I think that the reforms, that commission that designed those reforms had the right idea, and that is, I think some of these programs were originally designed to target the low-income people in poverty and not to provide for retirement for the whole population. And the problem with all of these entitlements programs is that what started out as a health care program or retirement program that clearly targeted low-income families, the indigent and so forth, has now expanded so that it covers the entire population. If you read in the Wall Street Journal, the dysfunction in Medicare today, that is absorbing more and more of the federal budget, basically has removed choice in health care for the entire population and replaced it with a nanny state. And the nanny state's basically deciding our health care system. And we don't need to go in this direction. There's a precedent for reform, not only going back to the Reagan reforms, even some of the European countries have had a great deal of success in recent decades. One, controlling total spending by imposing effective fiscal rules, the Swiss debt brake, a balanced budget rule that's in part of their constitution, and that did set the precedent for reforming these entitlements program. Sweden, by the way, which we all think of as the ultimate socialized medicine. In fact, for 3 decades, Sweden has been reforming their healthcare system. Back 3 decades ago, their socialized healthcare system, which had displaced private healthcare, was basically bankrupting the country. So for 3 decades, Sweden has reformed healthcare by expanding choice, by giving a larger segment of their population the kind of healthcare system we traditionally had, that is, one relying on private insurance, private choice, and also shifting some of this healthcare decision-making to the local, to the states, the local level, and creating incentives for economizing on healthcare. We know what to do. We know what reforms work. They worked in other countries. They worked in this country. Look at the reforms that Jeb Bush enacted in Medicaid in Florida. That's creating choice, expanding the private insurance system, and creating incentives for people to begin economizing on their health care costs. So we know what to do. Our problem is politicians don't seem to have gotten the message. If you follow the presidential debate, it's a disaster. There's no serious discussion of these reforms.
There's no serious discussion of anything. I mean, let's be frank.
So maybe Dr. Poulson, when Bernie Sanders says we should be more like Sweden, we should agree with him and say, yeah, let's move towards more free market policies.
He's right. He's right.
And I didn't mean at all to suggest that the Reagan reforms were not in fact successful. I meant that kind of the perception now. It's hard for millennials to see that. And I'd love to get your thoughts, Kelly, about kind of connecting with millennials on the nanny state economics that Dr. Poulson brought up.
Yeah, I mean, look, this does go back to the issue of selling freedom versus free stuff. It is something that I think we have yet to figure out well, because it's a lot easier for somebody to be like, oh, I would like to go to school for free and have all this health care for free. And you say, well, actually it's not free, but, and once you get to the but in that conversation, actually it's not free, but you're past 140 characters. And so we have a really hard time taking all of this and distilling it. But I do have some hope on the horizon for everybody who thinks that we're on the precipice of doom. I mean, every time we watch the presidential candidates, I know that it is easy to feel that way, but there are some major restructuring things that are happening right now in our economy that I think should give everybody in this room hope. I know, you're down, you're it's 8:30 or whatever, get some more coffee, but there is reason for hope. And here's what it is. The new economy, I'm a millennial because all my notes, by the way, are on my phone for this. But the new economy is changing the relationship of workers to firms. And it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but it is. Because people like me, many people in this room, have gone from being employees to contractors. And I cannot underscore enough how significant the difference is between having your taxes withheld and having to pay them quarterly. The difference in one's relationship, particularly millennials, who more and more are contractors in this new economy, who are new media consultants. That is a thing that we have now. By the way, when I graduated college, Facebook was not yet a thing. And that's something that is really weird because I am a millennial. Facebook, when I graduated college, wasn't a thing. And it is changing so rapidly that millennials now who are having to pay quarterly instead of just having their money taken from them and then think, oh, hey, I get this bonus in April. Their relationship with the federal government changes. It fundamentally changes when you are paying for something. Then you actually expect something in return. And so I would say one of the biggest things that we can do tactically is resist because at some point the federal government is going to realize that this is a crisis for them and they're going to try to figure out how to do withholding for contractors. It is something that absolutely they're going to have to do mathematically, because all of a sudden all these young people are going to be beating down their doors and saying, I'm sorry, you're spending $500 on a toilet seat. Why? That is something that is going to create the kind of accountability that will create then the political will to fundamentally change our relationship with an ever-expanding federal government.
And I think that's an excellent point. The natural changes in the economy are going to have huge effects on our generation in terms of our relationship to the federal government when we think about costs of spending. And specifically with Social Security, we're already seeing this happen. When economic assumptions change, when costs are more realized, people change their behavior. And folks in our generation are saving at a higher rate than older generations. We start saving much earlier. We tend to be less subject to early withdrawal fees and some of these negative effects that you would associate with building good credit. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we understand we're not going to be able to count on the federal government in our retirement. And that change has already happened to a large degree. As I mentioned before, over 2/3 of millennials expect to get nothing from Social Security, and they've internalized that assumption to change their behavior. So I think a lot of engaging with young people on these issues is just a matter of capitalizing on the opinions that they already hold and saying, hey, that's a conservative philosophy that you hold, not counting on the government, being personally accountable for your retirement savings. That's not what Bernie Sanders wants you to do. That's not what Hillary Clinton wants you to do. So come on in, the water's fine. The decisions that you're making are really already in line with kind of the vision that we have for America.
Well, I have a suggestion for millennials, and that is, it seems to me, and I may be misinterpreting what you're saying, but you're saying, well, here's a problem, and it will be obvious for Congress to identify the problem and to address the problem.
Nope.
That is a faith that I suggest you step back from, because we have been waiting for Congress to address the spending, get a constraint on spending, and introduce spending rules for 4 decades now unsuccessfully. And a balanced budget amendment has been proposed in Congress for the last 40, 50 years. And Congress steps back from that. They have not been willing to, one, enact fiscal rules that would constrain spending, and secondly, enact reforms and entitlements and other programs to be consistent with those spending limits. So I have a suggestion for you, and I suggest you put less faith in your politicians and congressmen, and begin thinking about how we as citizens can directly bring about these changes. And the precedent, again, is Switzerland. In Switzerland, they introduced a balanced budget amendment and a debt brake to constrain spending. They also enacted reforms in their entitlements programs, but they did it through a referendum. They did it by presenting this issue to citizens. Should the federal government control spending? Should the federal government reform these programs? And in Switzerland, they incorporated this in their constitution with an 80% approval rate. Now, we don't have a referendum in this country. It's possible for us to do that. But what we do have is the opportunity for citizens to directly influence and design and implement these rules, something called Article 5. Article 5 of the Constitution says there are 2 ways to amend the Constitution. We can sit back and wait for Congress to propose an amendment, or we as citizens can propose an amendment, and if we can get 34 states to approve a balanced budget amendment and fiscal rules consistent with that balanced budget amendment, Congress must call an Article 5 convention. And we could get a specific amendment that addresses and imposes a fiscal rule. But this requires that you and I as citizens get involved in this process. We now have 28 states that have passed a resolution calling for a balanced budget amendment. If we can get 7 more states, and I encourage you to look to a group I work with, the Balanced Budget Amendment Task Force. You can find us on the website. We are working with legislatures all over this country to try to get a resolution passed calling for a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. And I encourage you to get involved in these as citizens, directly involved in this process. As participants, you can make a lot of difference, a lot more effective impact than waiting for your representatives to do this for you.
Well, I think we absolutely agree that waiting for Congress to act on anything is a bad plan.
It's true.
And I think that with the changes in the economy, when we're trying to hold members accountable or directly influence at the state, local, or even federal level like that, there's a huge opportunity with millennials, given the changing relationship that Kelly talked about.
Yeah, I mean, welcome to Colorado, by the way, everybody who's not from here, our beautiful state. We actually do have an amendment in our Constitution. It's called TABOR. One of my primary jobs, especially this year, is trying to defend TABOR against all of the commies who keep coming after it over and over because they want more money in order to spend it. It's real annoying. It's basically every year. But I think there's an interesting there's this interesting fissure between what is theoretically the correct thing to do and for what there is the political will. And generally most of the problems that we have in terms of reform, I blame on AARP, sorry, they're helping to destroy the economy for us, because anytime that you put any proposal forward to have any kind of reforms, they will just come in and just destroy you. And the thing is, the classic political kind of thought is, and one of my mentors, Shari Williams, is the one who came up with this, so I want to give her credit, is that your influence in politics is a function of you being an MVP, money, votes, or press. And you have to be able to influence one of the three, and preferably all of the three. And the AARP is actually one of the most effective organizations in the country at basically stopping the change that millennials need. So MVP, they've got lots of money because they will send out not only direct mail to everybody who's basically like 45 and up, and start raising money for their lobbying efforts to stop any change, votes, until we can get millennials to actually come to the polls in the kind of numbers to defend our economy in the way that we need. We are still being outvoted by baby boomers and press. Man, they run the board on press. And so they are the ones, I would say, if there's like a single interest group that is doing the most damage to any kind of Social Security reform, any kind of Medicare reform, it is this kind of like AARP mentality that we have this, we've been paying in our whole lives, and we have these benefits coming to us, and therefore, despite the fact that it was designed basically where you would start getting benefits at about the average age of life expectancy, that it was designed just for the most indigent old people who couldn't work, it has turned into this gigantic entitlement monster. It's like the Blob. Did you guys ever see the movie The Blob? It just like grows and like eats everything, and you're like, whoa, what are we gonna do? Like until millennials, as a third of the population now, actually turn out and advocate for our own best interests, and don't follow people like Bernie Sanders. This is horrifying. Like, they're just making the Blob bigger. Until we can turn out and actually advocate for our own best interests, we will not prevail. But I think that the other fundamental problem, and I know Dr. Poulson will agree with me on this, is that we don't have any real economic education in elementary, middle, and high school. Like, I didn't take my first econ class till I was in college. And that's horrifying, because once I learned about the beauty of the free market and the fact that like wealth creation is a thing we can do, and it is like the single best human invention to pull people out of poverty, I didn't learn that until I was almost ready to drink and then could almost forget it. Like, that is horrifying.
Yeah, and don't forget your economics, please. Yeah. And I agree with you, and I would like to follow up your comment on Tabor, because you and I as citizens here in Colorado are really blessed. I helped design the Tabor Amendment back in the 1980s and 1990s. And as you know, what Tabor was passed as a constitutional amendment requiring that the growth in spending in this state grow at the rate of inflation and population growth. Tabor also requires that if any government in this state wants to raise taxes, issue debt, or spend above that limit, they have to have our approval as citizens. And we as citizens have been voting down tax increases, debt increases, spending in excess of the Tabor limit now for 2 decades. And Tabor has created one of the best business tax climates in this country. There's a reason Colorado has one of the highest rates of economic growth in the country. We have a low tax environment that's very attractive for business investment, growth, and jobs. And as you say, if you want to address problems of poverty, or indeed if you want to address any problem that we face at the federal or state level, you've got to grow. You have to have economic growth. If we stagnate, which we are doing, our economy is starting to slow down because of the spending and these entitlements programs. When we start stagnating, we fail to solve any of these problems. Now, we like to think in Colorado, we've set a precedent for what we can do at the federal level, and I'm working with, there are a number of groups that are trying to basically say, why shouldn't the federal government have spending limits, fiscal rules similar to the ones we have in Colorado? Why shouldn't, at the federal level, citizens be able to decide whether or not they want the government to issue debt or to increase spending above some limit? And I think that there's no reason why those similar rules cannot be enacted at the federal level. They don't exist now. Basically, we have no federal fiscal rules. They don't work. And other countries have demonstrated if we had had the Swiss debt brake in place over the last couple of decades, like Switzerland, we would have balanced our budget. We would have kept our debt below the tolerance level, which is what the Swiss have done. And so we know what works, but somehow you and I as citizens have got to get involved in this process and begin to get the federal government to fundamentally change the way in which they are conducting fiscal policies, and we need to impose constraints and rules at the federal level just as we have at the state level.
And if I can cut in there back to something that's kind of hopeful. Everybody's got one of these, right? Everybody in the room? Is it too early? Can you guys hear me? Do you have one of these? Okay. There we go. Good morning. Here's one of the great things about being a millennial. This thing is super cool, and it does almost anything. And I do realize sometimes it feels like the apocalypse because we have basically the world of information at our hands and just look at cat pictures. Also, I have a wallaby. You should follow him on Instagram. But no, here's the thing, is that this has created an entire generation of people who expect accountability and information at the push of your little button, or the touch of your screen, more appropriately. And the great thing about, I can take this and I can scan, because this is my favorite app, I can scan a wine bottle, and it will tell me how many points it is, where it came from, some notes about the winemaker, how much it retails for, and where I can buy it. So if I'm in a restaurant and I find a really great bottle of wine, which happens sometimes, I can hit my little button and I can figure out where to buy it, how much it costs, all of the information that I could ever want about it. And the thing about this is that it has created a generation of people who, some people are frustrated because they feel like we are entitled to information about everything, but the one entity that we don't have the kind of accountability that this magical little device creates for every other aspect of our lives is the government. And the thing is that millennials at some point are going to be like, I want to hit a button and look at that bridge right there. What percentage of my taxes that I am now paying quarterly, not being withheld, that I think I'm getting some kind of benefit back in April, what percentage of the massive 25-30% of my income that I am sending to this gigantic blob government is actually paying for that bridge? And once we create the kind of interactive government that is continuously being held accountable by people who expect constant accountability and access to information, that is when federal spending all of a sudden will be by necessity reined in by people who expect it.
I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, phones, they're magical. Also, guess what the free market got us? These, super cool, just saying.
And there's a pile-on effect that it's making the free market better. I mean,
yes.
you can tweet at a business and a customer service rep will get back to you. That's making the business more accountable. The money that you're sending them will be spent more wisely because they know that the consumers can hold them accountable.
Let me tell you, United, man, they're the best. I just tweet them, I'm like, you guys, I'm stuck, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, all the customer service people come for me. It's the best. It's so fun. These things are magical.
And if you do the same thing, you tweet at your member of Congress, and I can tell you this as a former congressional staffer, the intern who reads that tweet is just going to ignore it. there's no accountability in the same way with government, and millennials expect that, and maybe it's a great opportunity to make the government more accountable and work better for us.
But let's be honest, like, there are many members of Congress who should not be in charge of their own Twitter accounts. Like, I'm not advocating that, number one. But I mean, the thing is, like, every member, actually every politician, from the like lowest, tiniest little like board all the way up, they all have Google alerts on their names. Cause like, I mean, let's be honest, you don't run for office unless you kind of got somewhat of an ego. And I say this, I have a Google alert on my name, so I can't really throw stones. But there is this information, and the access is unprecedentedly exciting. Like, there are so many things, and I can't even imagine what it's gonna be like 10 years from now. Like, it's gonna be great or terrible, but we're the ones in this room who are gonna have the say on whether it is one of those two things.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on for right now. We will have about 5 minutes here to take questions from the audience for any of the panelists. There's a microphone set up right here. Feel free to make your way to the microphone if you have questions for any of the panelists.
Hi, thanks. My name is Mike. I'm not a millennial, but I employ a bunch. And what I haven't heard this morning is actually what we should tell them that we already think they care about. I would posit that talking about balanced budget amendments or constitutional conventions or Reagan reforms is probably not going to be successful with a generation that is naturally quite cynical about institutions generally. And I think you pointed out that they are saving at higher rates, but they're also quite different than we are. They're not accumulating assets. They're less likely to buy a home. They're going to get married later. They're putting off having kids. And if you think back in the 90s when we sort of came up with policies like child tax credits to make sure that people knew that we were the pro-family side of the economic argument, what are we going to actually tell people that are drowning under student debt, not likely to have a job more than 2 or 3 years, and they're likely to have 6 by the time they're 30? What is it that we can actually tell them that will connect these? And I don't think these big macro arguments about what happens in 10, 20 years are necessarily sufficient.
And I think you're absolutely right that just talking about the top line numbers is not going to necessarily be resonant with folks in our generation. But the thing to note about the millennials' financial savvy is part of the reason that we're not buying homes is we saw that if you can only put 1 or 2% down, that's not a good investment. That's not a good way to keep your money. We saw the housing market go under, and in the United States as a whole right now, the equity in the housing market is what it was before the crash. There are a fewer number of people who own homes, but the actual equity in those homes is where it was before. You have people who are better leveraged in those homes. So that was one point that you brought up, but I think it's absolutely important not to just present the top line numbers, but and Kelly talked about this, but the changing economy where people are in contract jobs more often than traditional employment situations, and making the case to them that this is something that the government doesn't like you doing because it gets in the way of their budget.
Yeah, I think the message that I suggest is, one, we agree with you. We think millennials should have choice, and you should have a choice over a much wider range of issues than you do currently, and especially tying these together, choice over spending, choice over fiscal policy, choice over taxes. And you can design fiscal rules that will give you that choice, which is what Tabor does. You as citizens in Colorado decide how much we want the government to spend and how much taxes we're willing to pay, how much debt we're willing to incur. Other countries in Sweden and in the Swiss cantons and at the federal level, Swiss citizens vote on hundreds of fiscal issues every year. It's up to citizens to make those choices. The same thing in Social Security. We agree. You should have a choice about your retirement savings, and you shouldn't be coerced into this failed Social Security system. We need to reform Social Security, health care in ways that expand your choice and that limit the coercion that is imposed on you by the federal government.
And in the case of Social Security, that is the argument that Generation Opportunity, our field directors, make every single day to potential young people, activists around the country, is that we all want to use apps like Mint and Acorns, which are savings apps that you have on your phone that automatically will put money in a retirement account for you. That's what young people are already doing, and the government is taking a big portion, an eighth of your wages, every year to fund this program that we are not counting on in any capacity. So I think that, especially in terms of Social Security, Generation Opportunity is engaging on the level of this is already what you're doing, and the government is getting in the way of it.
Yeah, in my case, and maybe I don't think I'm the only one who's like this. Any argument that's like a bottom line pocketbook argument for me, oh, you can buy fewer things on Amazon Prime if and the thing is that we can couch every one of these arguments on a very micro personal level. But the truth is, and the other thing is, that's how you make the political will to upend our entire Social Security thing. Because our Social Security Ponzi scheme, being on the bottom of the pyramid on a Ponzi scheme super sucks. It just does. But that's once you come to that realization, that's when you get that spark that's the political will in order to upend it.
And I think talking about choice is absolutely the way to do that, and we can extend that beyond Social Security or the debt and deficit. Thinking about net neutrality rules, a lot of millennials like to get plans that have preferred data deals because they use their data for Facebook and Twitter and Instagram more than they use it for searching the roll call votes on house.gov, for example. Yeah, sure. So companies will contract with Facebook and Twitter to say we'll have a lower rate for your data usage, and net neutrality would prevent that. So talking about the things that millennials are already engaged in and saying, look, the government is getting in the way of that, is something that Generation Opportunity is already doing, and I think you're absolutely right that that's where the conversation needs to be had. Well,
very good. My name's Todd Hathorn. I'm a mortgage lender in New Mexico.
Hi, Todd.
Nice to meet you. I'm very, first of all, I want to thank you for the comment about the Tabor Amendment. It's something that we would like to see exported to other states. We're certainly trying to do that in New Mexico.
Heck yeah.
We've seen one unicorn already this weekend. Now we've got an economist from Boulder who's conservative.
High five.
I'm a token conservative.
Token conservative, that's right. You got to have one on campus, right?
High five.
So.
You actually have 3 graduates of the CU system up here, all 3
That's
conservatives.
True. That's true. All conservatives.
The only 3 conservatives in the history. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about the student loan debt question. The student loan debt question is important to me as a mortgage lender. That is the #1 question we deal with people under the age of 40 that come into my office. They sit across from me, and the 2 things that we hear is, oh my gosh, how am I going to make these payments and buy a house? And the federal government stepped in and said something like, oh, if you pay for 120 months based on whatever it is, 5% of your current income, we will forgive the rest. Now, the economic model says somewhere along the line, there are schools that are creating debt that end up being pushed to the taxpayer, and at the end of the day, these people are working at McDonald's and fast food joints.
Right.
That's not an economic model that's sustainable long term. How can we get the educational institutions to be in a place where their product is responsible to the marketplace?
Ooh, can I start with that one? First off, I feel real bad for those people because as minimum wage is on the ballot here in Colorado, they're all about to be replaced by kiosks. So, hi, welcome to the economy. That's how this works. I think one thing is that I'm seeing is a lot of skepticism towards higher ed in general. I recently got married, and my husband and I are now starting the process of thinking about, tiny people. And we've already decided that the only majors we will pay for are hard maths, hard sciences, or welding school. I am done with this social justice warrior kind of craziness that is happening at colleges. And that's the thing, is that eventually the economy will correct the fact that you have $350,000 in a degree for a PhD in Chilean interpretive puppetry. That's a thing that eventually it will correct. But in the meantime, I think one of the most important things that we can be doing is advocating for non-liberal arts education, and for many of the alternatives. There are plenty of ways to make a good living without having to go through kind of this traditional thing. Also, costs are out of control largely because the government and unions have more of a say in education than the free market. And I, for one, would be interested in, like right now in Colorado, we have a regents race that nobody's heard of from CU. But we have one woman who's running, who's awesome, and then the Democrat who's running wants CU to divest from all oil and gas, and like think about the cost implications of that. The entire CU system divestiture from all into all renewables. It would be astronomically insane. And so we have to get involved even at the regent level.
So
The bad one or the good one? Or both?
So we're getting the wrap up.
Oh, sorry.
Kelly will come find
vote
you.
for her for CU Regent if you live in Colorado.
Generation Opportunity does not endorse candidates. Thank you so much.
No, sorry. That was just me.